Most people think a recession is a period of time when the economy turns against them. That is not the deepest truth. A recession is a transfer window. It is the moment when weak balance sheets lose negotiating power, strong balance sheets gain it, and assets start moving from frightened hands into prepared ones. That is why recessions feel so unfair, because they do not only punish ignorance after the fact, they reveal preparation that happened before the first ugly headline ever appeared. That is where I want to begin, not with comfort, with structure, because most people are about to make the same mistake they always make. They will watch the news, they will study unemployment numbers, they will stare at the stock market, they will feel fear rising in their body and assume the fear itself is useful. Meanwhile, the more important question will be sitting right in front of them, almost untouched. If my income weakened tomorrow, would I be forced to sell, forced to borrow, forced to obey, or would I be one of the few people calm enough to choose? That is the real recession question. Everything else is commentary. If you want the mother line for everything I am about to tell you, here it is. A recession does not mainly hurt people because prices fall. It hurts them because it exposes how much of their life was built on momentum, lifestyle, debt, noise, and fragile assumptions. And it rewards the few people who built liquidity, lowered obligations, controlled their identity, engineered their environment, and kept their attention clear enough to act while everyone else is reacting. That is the line, read it again. Because once you understand that, the whole emotional meaning of a downturn changes. You stop asking whether a recession is coming in some dramatic, cinematic sense. You stop asking whether the news has confirmed enough risk to justify finally paying attention. You stop asking what one brilliant trade will save you. You start asking a harsher and much more profitable question. If stress hits the system this year, which side of the transfer will I be on? That is the adult question. That is the question the wealthy answer. Before the crowd even admits there is a storm, most people fail long before the recession arrives. That is one of the oldest patterns in economic life. They fail in the expansion. They fail in the good years. They fail when money is still coming in. They fail when raises are still arriving. They fail when credit is easy enough to imitate progress. They fail by letting every increase in income become a matching increase in lifestyle. They fail by building a life that looks more impressive every year and becomes less survivable. Every year at exactly the same time, from the outside, this looks like success. Inside the balance sheet, it is usually exposure. That is why I say a recession is not the beginning of the damage, it is the reveal. The reveal of who built a machine and who built a costume. And once you see it that way, almost every financial decision changes shape. Now let me take you into the first mechanism. I call it the liquidity divide. A lot of people think cash is boring. Good. It is supposed to be. Cash is not there to entertain you. Cash is there to keep you from being turned into inventory when the market needs a sacrifice. That is what most people do not understand. The source material tells a very simple story of two people with similar starting points. One expanded lifestyle every time income rose. The other kept lifestyle stable and quietly built cash. When conditions weakened, the first panicked and the second went looking for discounted real estate and stocks. Fe Filosite Fe Turn 47 File 0 Fe, that is the liquidity divide. The surface difference between those two lives seems moral. One was better with money. Too shallow. The deeper difference is that one person used income to build optionality and the other used income to build dependence. That is what liquidity really is. Not just dollars in an account, optionality, time, decision, quality, the ability to wait one more month, the ability to say no to stupid terms, the ability to look at a falling market and see price instead of danger. That is what a cash cushion buys you. Most people think liquidity is a financial position. It is also a psychological one. If my rent is due, my cards are maxed, my car payment is rude, and my job feels shaky, then I do not care how intelligent I am. My brain is not free. My brain is rented by urgency. That is why the source material is so right to say that liquidity clears thinking. When you have a real cushion, you stop reacting and start seeing. Fe Filosite Fe Turn 47 File 0 Fe, that line matters more than any stock tip I could ever give you, because recessions are won by seeing, not by feeling, not by doom scrolling, not by performing concern, by seeing, and seeing requires room. That is why the first harsh question is the only honest one. If your income stopped tomorrow, how long could you last? Not in theory, not with rationalizations, not if your parents helped, not if you sold everything and begged. How long? Really? That number is your current freedom score? And if it is low, do not pretend you are investing. You are defending a lifestyle with optimistic language. That is different. A person with ideas and no liquidity is still weak. A person with cash and patience is dangerous. That is the liquidity divide. And recessions are where the difference becomes visible enough to change ownership. Now let me take you into the second mechanism. I call it the debt accelerator. Most people think of debt as a balance, a number on a screen, a monthly payment, an inconvenience. That is not what debt is. Debt is a future claim on your labor that has already started growing before you even wake up. That is the part almost nobody respects enough. The source material gives the blunt example of a $4,000 credit card balance at 22% interest, turning into far more than $4,000 repaid over time. And it makes the right philosophical point. Every dollar paid in interest is not merely a cost. It is money stolen from the future you were supposed to be building. Fe falicite, fe turn 47, file 0 fe. That is exactly right. Compound interest is not loyal. It compounds for whoever owns the claim. If you own the productive asset, compound interest can be your labor force. If someone else owns the claim on your consumption, compound interest becomes your jailer. That is why debt heading into a recession is not just a burden. It is an accelerator of damage. Income falls. Hours get cut, business slows, and the debt keeps charging as if none of that happened. Debt does not care that the economy changed. Debt does not care that your industry froze. Debt does not care that your boss panicked. Debt says the rate is the rate, the schedule is the schedule. That is the debt accelerator. It speeds up weakness. It turns a difficult quarter into a spiral. It is one of the cleanest reasons two households with similar incomes can enter the same downturn and leave with completely different lives. One goes in lean, one goes in loaded, one loses income and adjusts, one loses income and bleeds. That is the difference. This is why I have never believed that debt is merely a tactical matter. It is moral in one very specific sense. It shapes the quality of your freedom. A person who owes less thinks more clearly. That is not motivational fluff. It is operational truth. The source material says exactly that. The less you owe, the more clearly you think. And the more clearly you think, the better you act. Fe filicite, fe turn 47, file 0 fe. I would put that sentence on the wall of every household in America if I could. Because people keep trying to solve financial stress with more complexity, when what they often need first is less obligation. Now, I want to be precise. Not all debt is the same. Debt used to acquire productive assets can serve you. Debt used to maintain a version of yourself. Your income cannot actually serve someone else. A mortgage on a good property can be intelligent. A loan used to expand a business with real demand can be intelligent. A revolving credit balance used to keep a fragile lifestyle upright is a slow emergency. That distinction matters. The wrong debt heading into a recession is not a small flaw. It is a time bomb. And once you understand that, the second principle becomes obvious. Go in lean. Not because suffering is virtuous, because obligations remove options. And in a recession, options are everything. Now let me take you into the third mechanism. I call it the consumption mask. This is quieter than debt, and in some ways more dangerous because it does not look like a financial problem at first. It looks like identity. That is what makes it powerful. The source material names this directly. It calls it the consumption identity, the point where spending stops being about function and starts being about selfhood, belonging, signal, and self-worth. Fe filicite, fe turn 47, file 0 fe. That is one of the deepest and most expensive traps in modern life. A nicer car is not transportation anymore. It is proof. A better apartment is not shelter anymore. It is status. A vacation is not recovery anymore. It is identity maintenance. A device, a restaurant habit, a wardrobe, a neighborhood, all of it becomes part of the self-story. And once spending becomes self-story, cutting back stops feeling like prudence. It starts feeling like becoming less. That is why people keep lifestyles long after the underlying economics stop making sense. They are not only defending comfort, they are defending who they think they are. That is the consumption mask. The source material makes this personal by pointing to Buffett's own habits. The same house since 1958. A modest car, a repetitive breakfast routine. Whether one copies those details literally is not the point. The point is that identity tied to principle creates more resilience than identity tied to display. Fe filicite, fe turn 47, file 0 fe. Exactly, because when your self-worth is wrapped around possessions, a recession does more than pressure your budget. It threatens your picture of yourself. That makes rational adjustment much harder. If my image depends on maintaining visible signals, I will borrow to protect the signals. I will cling to the expensive lease. I will justify the memberships. I will tell myself the nicer lifestyle is what I deserve. And all the while, the real thing I deserve, freedom, keeps getting sold for symbols. That is the tragedy. A lot of financially fragile households are not fragile only because of arithmetic. They are fragile because their identity would have to shrink before their obligations could. That is hard. I understand that. It is still lethal. This is why I tell people the recession question is not only financial, it is existential. If your possessions were stripped away tomorrow, would you still know who you are? That is not philosophical theater. That is a preparedness question, because the person who can separate self-respect from visible consumption can adapt. The person who cannot will keep paying for appearances long after appearances stop making sense. That is the consumption mask, and it is one of the main reasons smart people with good incomes still enter recessions much weaker than they look. Now let me take you into the fourth mechanism. I call it the environment architecture. Most financial advice is too obsessed with willpower. Spend less. Try harder, be more disciplined. Resist temptation. Find willpower matters. It is also one of the weakest systems I know. Willpower is thin when you are tired, thin when you are stressed, thin when everyone around you is spending, thin when the news is loud and your nervous system is crowded. The source material says this correctly. People who build lasting discipline do not mainly do it through force. They do it by designing environments where the right behavior is easier than the wrong one. It even names this environment architecture. Fay file a site, Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay. That phrase deserves more attention than it gets, because this is where the whole game becomes winnable. If your savings depend on a monthly act of heroic self-control, then your savings are still living at the mercy of your weakest week. That is too fragile. If your transfers happen automatically before your hand touches the checking account, then you have changed the battlefield. Now the default works for you. That is the environment architecture. The source material is specific here. Savings automation, investment automation, making the good behavior frictionless and adding friction to the bad behavior. Fay file site. Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. Automation is not laziness. Automation is pre-commitment. It is how adults refuse to renegotiate the future every time the present feels emotional. And the environment is not only digital or financial, it is human. The source material also says something important about friends, mentors, and norms. You mirror the behavior of the people around you, whether you acknowledge it or not. Fayful site Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay. That is true in money, the same way it is true in health. If everyone around you spends every raise, you will need unusual strength to resist that gravity. If everyone around you speaks in long timelines, builds buffers, and treats downturns as part of the cycle instead of as divine punishment. Your own behavior begins changing without a speech. That is environment too. A person may think he has a money problem. Often he also has a room problem, a voice problem, a norm problem. That is why I do not trust isolated acts of discipline nearly as much as I trust designed environments. The right room changes your behavior before your behavior can justify it. That is one of the highest return investments in life. Now let me take you into the fifth mechanism. I call it the attention tax. This may be the quietest and most modern threat of all. The source material says this directly, and I think it is exactly right. The real product of much of the news and platform economy is not your financial health, but your attention. And fear is one of the most reliable ways to capture that attention. Fay file a site, Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay. That is the attention tax. Not money taken from the bank first. Clarity taken from the mind. That may be even more expensive, because if I can steal your clarity during a downturn, I can steal everything that clarity was supposed to protect. I can steal your patience. I can steal your discipline. I can steal your willingness to hold through pain. I can steal your ability to distinguish a temporary markdown from a permanent impairment. That is what fear-based media does in practice. It taxes decision quality. The source material says Buffett's response is to turn the noise off and return to fundamentals. What is the business worth? What will it likely be worth in 10 years? And is this a real lasting problem, or fear presenting itself as a problem? Fay file site, Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay. That is the only adult way through a noisy recession. Not denial, not manic consumption of catastrophe. Stillness. A recession is an attention test before it is an investment test. If I cannot protect my attention, I will not protect my capital. That is the sequence. And this is why I tell people the most valuable asset in a downturn is not only cash. It is clear thinking. Cash without clarity gets used badly. Clarity without cash becomes regret. You need both. That is the whole machine. Now let me say something harder. The media environment wants you agitated because agitation is profitable. Your portfolio wants you calm because calm is profitable. Those are opposing incentives. Understand that early, and the world becomes much easier to read. You stop treating every alarming headline as a command. You stop treating speed as intelligence. You stop confusing being informed with being emotionally saturated. That is the attention tax. It is paid by the person who confuses constant watching with wise preparation. Now let me take you into the sixth mechanism. I call it the readiness ladder. This is where the whole message stops being philosophy and becomes sequence. The source material ends with a four-step framework: awareness, control, growth, freedom. It is simple, but it is not shallow. It is the right order. Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay awareness first. See the full picture, every expense, every debt, every rate, every recurring charge. No hiding, no blur, no mood. The source material asks the right question here too. If my income stopped tomorrow, how many months could I last? It says clearly that if the answer is less than 6 months, then building that cushion is the first priority. Fay turn 47. File 0 Fay, that is awareness, reality before style. Then control, automation, debt attack, system design, identity inspection. The source material is again right to emphasize highest interest debt first and to tie control to systems rather than good intentions. Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay, that is control. Then growth. This is where the whole emotional meaning of recession changes. The source material says what Buffett always says in one form or another: when good assets are sold because someone else is desperate, price and value separate, and prepared people can finally buy at terms fear created. Fay turn 47 file 0. Fay, that is growth, not fantasy, not be greedy, as a slogan. Prepared acquisition, and then freedom. This is the part most financial talk forgets. The source material says money is not the goal. Freedom is, and it ties that freedom to systems that work, clear thinking, and a life where recession feels like opportunity rather than pure threat. Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay, that is the right ending, because money without freedom is just numerically impressive dependence. The whole point of the machine is to widen your options, to lower desperation, to buy back time, to make bad terms optional. That is the readiness ladder. Awareness, control, growth, freedom, in that order. Miss the order, and you usually destroy yourself. Try to jump to growth without control, and you become one of the people selling. Talk about freedom without awareness, and you are just decorating denial. That is why sequence matters so much. Now let me take you into the seventh mechanism. I call it the wealth transfer window. This is the real secret hiding underneath the entire file. Recessions do not randomly redistribute wealth. They transfer it with brutal consistency from the leverage to the liquid, from the urgent to the patient, from the identity bound to the principle, bound from the reactive to the prepared. That is the transfer. The source material says this openly in one of its best lines. The wealth gap that forms during recessions is not created during the recession. It is created in the quiet months before, when somebody builds a cushion instead of upgrading lifestyle, studies reality instead of reacting, and positions before the urgency becomes obvious. Fay turn 47 file 0 Fay, that is exactly right. This is why I reject the childish view of recessions as random cruelty. They are not random. Pain is widespread. Yes, still underneath the pain, the mechanism is orderly. The people with cash and low obligations get to decide. The people with noise in their heads and bills at their throat do not. That is the wealth transfer window. It explains why the same recession can destroy one household and enrich another starting from similar incomes. Not because one was chosen by fate, because one was structurally available to opportunity and the other was structurally unavailable. That is a harder sentence than most people want to hear. It is still the sentence that matters. Now let me say something even harder. A lot of people fantasize about profiting from the next downturn while still living in a way that guarantees they will be one of the people forced to liquidate during it. That is delusion. You do not profit from recessions by admiring Buffett quotes. You profit from recessions by making yourself less fragile before fragility gets repriced. That is the work: boring, unglamorous, quiet, completely decisive. Now let me take you into the eighth mechanism. I call it the calm advantage. This is the mechanism that ties everything together, because it is the part most people underestimate and the part Buffett has exploited his entire life. The source material says Buffett is not nervous about what is coming, and does not want the viewer to be either. It says nervous is for the unprepared and readiness is for the people who built something solid before urgency arrived. Fe Philocite Fe Turn 47 File 0 Fe that is not motivational sugar. That is a structural observation. Prepared people really do feel differently. Not because they are saints, because the machine beneath them is different. A person with 6 months of expenses, low bad debt, automated saving, clear identity, and quiet attention is not living in the same emotional economy as the person who needs next month's paycheck to arrive at full speed while the card balance grows and the headlines scream. That is why calm is so valuable. It is not a personality trait first. It is often a balance sheet outcome that is the calm advantage. And once you see that, you stop worshiping charisma during a recession. You stop envying the loud, confident people on television. You start asking the only useful question, what structure would make calm rational for me? That is the question. Because calm without structure is performance. Calm with structure is power. Buffett was calm in 2008, not because he had magical nerves. He was calm because he had built a position from which fear became usable. That is different. Ordinary people can do some version of that too. Not at his scale, at their own. That is enough. Now let me make the identity flip explicit. Most people think recession preparation means trying to predict the downturn perfectly. Too small. The real preparation is becoming the sort of person who can remain liquid, think clearly, avoid stupid obligations, and act deliberately when other people are too emotionally crowded to do anything but protect the present. That is the flip. A news watcher wants to know if the recession is official. A steward of capital wants to know whether his own machine is ready before the announcement. A fearful person asks how bad it will get. A prepared person asks what he needs in place before the first for sale appears. A panicked person wants reassurance. A calm person wants structure. Those are different minds. The market pays them very differently. Now let me bring the operating system together in plain language. First, measure honestly how long you can survive without income. Second, destroy expensive debt before debt destroys your judgment. Third, separate self-worth from spending so you can cut quickly when the cycle turns. Fourth, automate the good behavior and redesign your environment so willpower is not your only defense. Fifth, protect your attention from fear merchants during downturns. Sixth, follow the order, awareness, control, growth, freedom. Seventh, remember that wealth transfer begins before the recession feels official. Eighth, build the kind of structure that makes calm rational. That is the operating system, not panic, not magic preparedness. Now let me put the blade into this as cleanly as I can. The 2026 recession is coming, maybe quietly first, maybe loudly later, and the people who will be hurt most are not the ones who simply guessed the timing wrong. They are the ones who entered it with no cushion, too much debt, an identity tied to consumption, no system stronger than willpower, and a mind so colonized by noise that fear gets to make their decisions for them. That is the real danger. And if you remember nothing else from what I said, remember this. A recession is not something that happens to you once the headlines get dark. It starts much earlier than that. It starts in the months when you still have time to build liquidity, kill bad debt, reclaim your attention, and decide whether you want to enter the next transfer as a seller, a victim, or a buyer. Choose now.